Hey guys, today we're going to talk about Cuba, but first why don't you write the questions? Don't worry about the sources at the bottom. Go ahead and write the questions and we'll talk about Cuba. Cuba. Cuba, you can see a picture of it right here. And it is just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. You can see there's not much difference space-wise on the map between Cuba and the United States. But Cuba was a little bit different in gaining its independence. Cuba was under the control of Spain, and just like many places in the Americas, they were part of imperialism. Spain was the country that was the home country, and it controlled Cuba. Now you remember that Spain controlled a lot of the Americas. Most of what you see here and down into a pretty fair amount of South America, pretty much the whole western coast. But every one of those places by 1898 had gained their independence from Spain, except Puerto Rico over here, the Philippines way up in the South Pacific, Guam, and Cuba. They had yet to get their independence until 1898, and it was the Spanish-American War which would gain Cuba its independence. But even before the Spanish-American War, a guy named Jose Marti, who actually did a lot of studying in the United States, had started a revolution in Cuba and had actually maintained a pretty fair amount of this southern and eastern part of Cuba. But he wouldn't have the troops to be able to take it all as quickly as the United States troops did. Now you may wonder how the United States got involved with this. It's just it's something that we'll go over in just a little bit. But one of the main things to know about Cuba, they're known for its sugar. You can see sugar cane right here. This is an old-time photograph. It says here cutting sugar cane. You can see people cutting the sugar cane. Here's more of a modern type photograph of people cutting sugar cane. And this is where sugar comes from. It comes from the cane, and all through up this route up through here is a lot of sugar. And Cuba is known for this. Now, speaking of the Spanish-American War, the Spanish-American War is how Cuba got its independence. But notice the word Cuba is not in the name of the war. It was the United States versus Spain, and it just happened to be that they were fighting for the independence of Cuba. Now, in our particular class, we have watched an extensive video on this war. So going into this video that I'm making, you already know a lot about it. And you can see a couple of different photographs where one photograph is in Spanish, and you can see it kind of had a greedy depiction of Uncle Sam here. The United States, and this is in Spanish right here, États Unis, is just reaching out and just grabbing whatever it can, and Cuba is going to be within its grasp. However, this is a much different rendition here. Here it is in, looks like it is in English, this written right here. And you have United States who is holding hands with the Maiden of Cuba, and both of them are warning the Spaniards to get out, and I suppose just getting them out. Well, regardless of what the United States motives was, the Spanish-American War, the United States defeated Spain, and it basically kicked Spain out of the Americas. Spain did not control Cuba anymore. Now the question would be, would Cuba become a United States state? And there was quite a bit of debate over that. But the United States decided that that was not going to be the course they would take. And by 1902, the Cuban government was declared to be able to run itself. Now that was 4 years that the United States controlled Cuba. And there was a lot of, the book says that there was a lot of resentment about United States presence. But anyway, even though the United States let Cuba have their own country, they did keep a big naval base in Guantanamo Bay. And I will flip back to here, and you can see Guantanamo is just right here. So that bay right there is where the United States Naval Base was and continues to be. Now, so you have from 1902 forward. And 1902 forward, you had a lot of military leaders and political leaders in Cuba, and for the most part, they were very friendly with the United States. The United States had been one of the reasons why they were free. And here's this picture here, Havana before Castro. We'll hear about Castro. When Cuba was a tropical playground, what this indicates is that people from the United States could come to Cuba, just like the United States people could come to Mexico to be tourists, to have fun in the sun, I guess you might say. But that would change with this guy named Castro. In fact, his name was Fidel Castro, and you can see some pictures of him right here. In the late 1950s, Fidel Castro was a young lawyer, and he amassed troops in the hills of Cuba for a revolution against the dictator at the time, Batista. And in 1959, Batista could sense what was coming, so he fled the country, and Fidel Castro took over as leader. Now, this was 1959, and Castro would be the leader of Cuba until 2008, almost 50 years. A long, long time he was the leader of Cuba. Now, Castro was not as friendly to the United States. In fact, he stopped tourism and he stopped trade from the United States. And he became close ties with the Soviet Union. Now, you see here Castro with holding hands and up in arms, celebratory, with Nikita Khrushchev, and that is also this guy right here. Nikita Khrushchev was the premier of the Soviet Union. He happened to be the one who took off his shoe at the United Nations and banged it on the podium and said to the United States ambassador, "We will bury you." He was, during the Cold War, he was the leader of the Soviet Union, and there was almost instances where we had nuclear bombs dropped because of the relationship between Khrushchev and the United States. Well, anyway, Khrushchev was communist, which is a form of socialism, and Castro turned out to be communist also. You know, socialism is where you have a hands-on government, indicates every aspect of a person's life, and that also indicates a command economy where the government controls the prices, where the government controls the supply of any goods. But anyway, Castro immediately took over any United States companies in Cuba and produced this socialist communist economy and a government with a command economy. He instantly redistributed the land to the poor people, which was very popular with the poor people, I'm sure, and he imprisoned anyone who spoke out against him. He had lots of trade with the Soviet Union. Now, eventually the Soviet Union would collapse in the 1990s, but Cuba continued to have the communist socialist command economy regime. Now, there was an incident in 1962 where there was a Cuban missile crisis. Soviet ships had brought in missiles to Cuba and had placed them where they could attack the United States in case of a war. You could send a missile from Cuba to the United States very quickly, since it was just 90 miles south. So the United States found out about that, and they put a blockade up around Cuba, which meant no Soviet ships could get in, and it was kind of I've heard it called like a stare down between Kennedy and Khrushchev, and eventually Khrushchev gave in, and these military missiles were deployed, or taken down. Oh, let's take a look right here. So the United States does not trade with Cuba. Cuba does not trade with the United States, and that's not just a 1950s or 60s or 70s thing. That is something even today. Here's a more modern cartoon. You have our President Obama, who, just like all the presidents before him since 1959, are not trading with Cuba, and Cuba is not trading with the United States. And you wonder how that will change, if it will change in your lifetime, because there has been a change in power. Fidel Castro in more modern times looked like this. Just like everybody, he grew old, but he was the leader up until his death in 2008. Would things change when Castro died? Well, Probably not, because his brother, his younger brother, Raul Castro, has been the leader of Cuba since 2008 and has continued the type of government and the lack of trade with the United States. One other thing about a couple other things you need to know about Cuba is that there is a sport that is incredibly popular in Cuba, and it's not soccer. You know, soccer is very popular in many countries in the world, but what seems to be the most popular sport in Cuba is baseball. And in fact, here's some pictures I pulled from the web, and you saw the sources earlier about kids playing in the street in baseball, playing baseball in the street. Here's this kid just next to the curb, fielding without a glove, without a shirt, just sandals on. But he's got that baseball. Now, even Castro, I mean, this is Fidel Castro right here, has been known to be very supportive of baseball, and here he's even in the batter's box looking to hit the pitch. Cuba, being a very small country, actually won the World Championships in 1996. Now, that's not something that'll be on a test or anything, but you would think that it would be World Championships would be won by a bigger country. But Cuba is very widely known for its baseball. And I guess one other thing about Cuba, there is a carnival in Cuba that's the end of July, which coincides with the end of the sugar harvest. And there is music and there is dancing in the street, and this looks like this was the carnival in 2012. So that kind of gives you a little bit of sense of a celebration which is important in Cuba. Don't forget to go back and do the questions. Hope you've learned a little bit about Cuba.